Hey guys, in this video, we are going to be doing the Ulduar 10-man loot prio. We're going to be going over all the hard mode items, some trinkets from the normal encounters, and also the 10-man tier, and discussing what should happen there. Now, of course, you don't need to prioritize anything in 10-man necessarily, but because Blizzard has buffed the hard mode items, a lot of them are actually best in slot now in 10-man, and that means that you might want some class prios in your 10-man guild runs, just to make sure that classes that are getting their BIS items get them over classes that might replace them sooner. So there's a lot of best in slot gear in Ulduar 10-man, so that's what we're going to be covering. Before I get into it, I would appreciate it if you subscribed to the YouTube channel and followed my Twitch in the description below. Helps me a lot. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is actually the tier. And I've got this little notepad here that I'm going to look at. And essentially what the notepad is doing is it tells us how good the tier bonus is in isolation. So not talking about the individual item itself, but actually talking about what the bonus does for the character. What this lets us look is specifically for 10-man. This is only for 10-man. We're looking at what set bonuses are really high impact, really powerful, not the stats on the items. And that's because the 10-man items are not very high eye level. However, the set bonuses still work the same. So for example, in 10-man, if we could get some tier pieces over to our Discipline Priest, that would help them activate the 4 set. And I'll try and show some of these as I talk about them. The 4 set for the Discipline Priest is insanely good. This Power Word Shield also grants you 250 spell power. I think I had 450 there. It's supposed to be 250. But it is insane. It essentially means that your Discipline Priest is going to have a crazy amount of spell power all the time. So that would be a perfect example of a set that would be great to try and get set up in 10-man, because even if you're just using the 10-man set, you still get that really strong bonus. So I'll talk about each of the sets really quick and then rank what classes should get them. So on the Conqueror token, the disc set is phenomenal. 250 spell power when you press Power Word Shield. Obviously, that's going to be up all the time. Amazing, right? 2 set, not as big of a deal. It's mainly the 4 set. If you happen to be playing Holy Priest, the 4 set is still good, especially in 10-man if you're not with another disc. But it's a little awkward to use, even though the Holy Priest Bistless does use it. It's a little awkward because sometimes you don't want a shield as a Holy Priest because you're stealing shields from a disc. Over to Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest tier is also insane. It increases the damage done by your Devouring Plague by 15%, and your Mind Blast also gives you haste. These set bonuses are really, really powerful, and definitely would be, especially because Shadow Priests don't use much tier from tier 7, it would be insane to get it on them right away. So they're an amazing candidate for the tier. Then we go to Prop Paladin. Now for Prop Paladin, if you happen to be in a guild and your goal is to down the raids really fast and go straight to Algalon, because he hits so hard, your tanks need a ton of gear. So if you're in a guild that's going to be rushing straight to Algalon, you're in a more hardcore guild, you're in a guild that raids a lot or has practiced on PTR, you're a lot of times going to want to give a lot of gear to your tanks, and that might even mean these initial tier sets. So for all of the tanks, that is an option, is to immediately give your tank all the gear if you think you're getting to Algalon really quickly and potentially prepared to kill him pretty quickly. Other than that, though, the set is not really great otherwise for them. The 4 set is pretty low impact, and the 2 set is just a little bit of single target threat. So it's really not very good tier bonuses. So it would not be very good to prio unless you really feel like your tank needs that set bonus, or rather the individual stats and not the bonus to do well on Algalon. Then we have Holy Paladin. Now, Holy Paladin's 4 set is BIS and good, but they really do want the 4 set before they take off tier 7. Tier 7 is just really strong for Holy Paladin, so they're going to be lower on the totem pole when it comes to tier, just because removing their tier 7 is hard to do until they get a full set ready. So sending tier their way wouldn't be very effective early on. Rep Paladins, they're a decent recipient for tier because their 2 and 4 sets are both really good. Long term, they're not going to use it in their bis out of 25 man, but still pretty reasonable to help them out early in 10 man. When we go over to Warlock, Demo and Affliction both gain a lot. However, both of those specs were running 4 set from tier 7, and that means that they're going to be losing that as soon as they start to incorporate some of these Ulduar 10-man items. So it's a little harder for them to use, so they're not quite as prioritized. And then we've got Destro. Destro, it's amazing for, but not really counting on too many Destros as their main spec that they play, typically. So again, all of this little notepad, I'll have it in the description below if you're interested to follow along. But yeah, the conclusion is, if you're going to rush to kill Algalon, you're going to want to give tier to your Prot Paladin to get him beefy really early. But otherwise, giving your Disc Priest, getting them to set early is going to be really important, especially during progression. To have 250 spell power on your Disc, that's going to make every shield they press stronger. They scale really well with spell power, and that's going to, save your entire raid from dying. It's just very, very powerful. Now, Shadow Priest is another great recipient, potentially right after your disc or even before your disc if you deem that it'd be better that way. If you're worried more about damage than healing, I suppose. But the Shadow set is amazing, and they don't use tier from tier 7, so that is an amazing candidate. Then after that, Affliction just gains a tremendous amount, so even though they have to break their tier 7, it's still going to be worthwhile. Then you kind of have your choice of Ret, Demo, or Prot Paladin, whatever makes sense. Prot Paladin just for some extra tankiness, because it is important to gear your tank. Demo does like the set bonuses, and so does Ret. So definitely go with them if your Prot Paladin has a reasonable alternative. And then lastly, Holy Priest and Holy Paladin. Again, the Holy Priest set's a little weird to try and use if you play with a disc. And Holy Paladin is holding onto their tier 7 for a while. But again, this is for 10 man. Not for 25 man. When it comes to 25 man, we're going to be looking more at the individual item as well, and if it's bis. Whereas in 10 man, we're really just looking to connect the set. So I'm not going to be talking about glove and boot and head and chest. As we go through, it's more about what sets in general are good. Next, we have the Protector token. The Resto Shaman set. Oh, and I forgot to show some of these sets. So I do apologize for that. Let me show a couple of those really quick. The Holy Paladin set increases your Sacred Shield. That's the one that's pretty good, but you need the 4 set to use. The Prot Paladin 4 set's pretty underwhelming with block value. I did show that one. And the Ret set gives you damage with Hammer of Wrath, damage with Divine Storm and Crusader Strike, so it's pretty good. Over with the Warlock set, their 2 set gives Unstable Affliction 20% damage increase, which is actually really huge. And 10% Immolate, which is also good for Destro and Demo. And then the 4 set increases the critical strike of your Shadow Bolt and Incinerate. Even if you might not use this in full bis, it's very good early on while gearing. So those are all those items. Next, we're going to talk about the Protector tier token. First up, we have the Resto Shaman. So the Resto Shaman token is very, very good at the 4 set. 2 sets pretty mundane, but the 4 set, reducing the cast time of Chain Heal, that is equivalent of around 400 to 450 haste, according to the Resto Shaman guide, which is a tremendous amount of stats on your Chain Heal. So that's really good. Only problem with Resto is they also had good set bonuses in tier 7. Then we have Enhancement. Enhancement also had really good set bonuses in tier 7. So despite the 2 and 4 set being really good, they're gonna lose. They're gonna lose some just by switching off that gear. So they're not necessarily the first one that should get the tier, even though increasing the damage of their Lava Lash and Storm Strike by 20% is quite good. And also the Maelstrom frequency being increased is also really good. Onward to Ellie. Now, Ellie is a great candidate to get early tier because they didn't really care for their tier much in tier 7. The periodic damage by Flame Shock increasing is an okay damage increase, but the real big one is the critical strike from Lightning Bolt causing the target to take nature damage equal to Lightning Bolt's damage over time. That is actually a very big DPS increase and very good. Up next, we'll talk about Hunter. Now, Hunter's tier is just not very good. Long term, they don't use it at all, and they can make some use out of their 4-set and 2-set, but it's just not too terribly good. And the other problem is if they are trying to trap weave on certain fights, that's going to cut into some of the steady shotting, of course. And in general, their Serpent Sting just doesn't do as much damage, so 10% damage on it is not that good. So all things considered, Hunter sets are just pretty weak, and there's lots of offset items they can go for instead. So yeah, Hunter is pretty low on the totem pole there. Then we go to Warrior. Warriors are quite good with their tier. That's the tank one. The DPS Warrior for both Fury and Arms, it's quite good. Fury really likes the 2-set because they heroic strike a lot more than Arms. So the heroic strike and slam crits granting you haste is better for Fury. I also believe haste is better for Fury than Arms as well. And when it comes to the 4-set, Arms doesn't use Mortal Strike nearly as much as Fury uses Bloodthirst in terms of the percentage of their damage. So the set is really amazing for Fury and pretty good for Arms. Lastly, Prot. The Prot 2-set is pretty mundane, just a little bit of threat increase on your Devastate. And the 4-set is pretty good, causing you to take 10% reduction of magic damage, but they don't even use it in their BIS, so it's not like it's so amazing, but it's pretty good. So what this results in is you're going to stack your Prot Warrior if you're trying to rush for Algalon. Otherwise, Fury is a great early candidate to get tier. Also, Ellie. Those are some of the best to get tier. Could go either way there, but I think Fury gains a little bit more. Whereas, Fury gains a lot from the 2-set and the 4-set, whereas Ellie kind of needs the full 4-set to gain a little bit less than Fury would, but both great early candidates. Enhance and Resto are great candidates to get the tier as well, but I suggested giving them later tier because they actually have to take off their tier 7 gear, so they're going to need a few items before they even, swap over. Likewise, Arms and Prot, you still want your Prot to get some items if they're missing out just to shore up their gear for 25-man. But I wouldn't put them as super high prio if you're not rushing to Algalon. And then Arms, of course, gains a nice solid amount. It's good for them. Hunter last. Onto the Vank token. So for the Vank token, the Mage tier is pretty crazy. The 2-set, increasing your Arcane Frostbolt, Frostfirebolt, and Fireball spells have a chance to gain spell power. That's actually very, very good. Because the spell power lasts 15 seconds and it's 350 spell power, it actually is up a lot and ends up being really good. So quite amazing for Arcane Fire and Frostfirebolt build. Now, if you run the 4-set, it is amazing for Fire and not really quite as good for Arcane. When we come to Druid, and keep in mind for tier 7, mages like their 2-set. So it is still fine for them to quickly pick up a few pieces of tier 8 and run both of the sets. But they do like their tier 7 2-set quite a lot. So especially if you're Arcane, not really worth rushing straight to 4-set over other classes getting their stuff. Now for Resto Druid, they don't use any tier in current tier 7 content going into Ulduar, so they have no problem picking up the set pretty quick. Increasing the healing done by Swift Mend is a nice, for your little emergency heal, but the big deal is the 4-set. Rejuvenation providing an instant heal, in addition to, its effect, is really strong. So very good for Resto Druid, and they're a good candidate to get that tier. Over to Bear. Bear's tier is not good. Only give tier to Bear if you're rushing, again, for an early Algalon kill, and your Bear is going to be an important part of that. But yeah, unfortunately, the tier for Bear is actually pretty lackluster. The 2-set is almost useless in that it is going to give them, help them with rage, but especially on these hard-hitting Ulduar bosses, they shouldn't be having rage issues. And their 4-set does extend the duration of their defensive survival instinct, but it's just not quite worth just having more stats from offset items. So Bear is not a good candidate for tier unless you really feel like they need to be really strong for Algalon early in your guild. Then we go to Cat. Cat likes the 2-set and the 4-set, even though it doesn't use 4-set in Eventual Abyss. So yeah, both would be quite good. Currently, Cats usually use 2-set from tier 7, so they could quickly incorporate 2 more pieces into tier 8. When it comes to Boomy, they really like their set as well, but the problem is they have an insane set from tier 7, so it can be a little hard to take that off right away. But yeah, increasing the bonus by Eclipse and Starfire increases the bonus from your Eclipse for Starfire and Wrath by 7% is actually very good and ends up being a lot of damage. And also the 4-set that causes your Insect Swarm to give you instant Starfire cast. That also ends up being really good, even though you don't use it in Eventual Abyss. So on to the Rogues now. Rogue doesn't use Assassination, or Assassination 4-set is not really a thing for them. Typically not using Rupture. But the 2-set is very good, which causes their Deadly Poison to gain them energy each time it ticks. So that's very good for Assassination. Now, Combat 2-set also gains a lot of damage. And they actually benefit from the 4-set as well. So Combat really likes both. Frost Death Knights gain a tremendous amount from their tier. But they also already had really good tier from your previous phase. So despite having increased crit chance on their Frost Strike and then increased damage done per disease on their Obliterate, their old tier was really good. So it's going from good to good, but might be hard to incorporate right away. Now, then we have Unholy. Unholy has a decent benefit from the 2-set, but not really any value gain from the 4-set. Most Unholy setups are not running Scourge Strike. And that's the deal for Unholy. On some Blood, their 2-set is not the best. Increasing damage done by Rune Strike. It is a threat ability that they're using a lot, but it's not insane anyway. It's not like, life-changing. Just some passive extra threat, which is kind of nice. And then their 4-set's actually quite good. That causes them to take less physical damage when they press Anti-Magic Shell. It gives them another defensive against physical attacks, of which they already had a lot, but, the rich get richer, right? Anyway, in summary, your Blood Decay and your Bear would be good to stack if you're potentially rushing Algalon, depending if one of those are your tanks, especially the Blood Decay, since they like tier anyway. After that, early tier on a Fire Mage is going to be insane. They have at least, 2 tier slots ready for the 2-set, which is really nice. And eventually even the 4-set is obviously amazing for them too. Arcane would like 2 pieces as well, pretty early. Combat, Blood Decay, Assassination, Feral, Resto, these are all classes that can very quickly incorporate tier and gain a lot of damage. Especially Combat and, Combat getting a quick 2-set really is nice as well. And Assassination getting a 2-set. All of those are great candidates. Now, I put Frost DK pretty low just because they already had a really good tier. And Boomy is pretty low because they're going to have to break their 4-set. And it might be better that they start breaking that with 25-man gear rather than 10-man gear, simply because they're going to go from great tier set to great tier set. And, the slight change in stats, they might not end up gaining nearly as much as some of these other classes. And then Unholy is pretty far down just because they really only use 2-set and it's not that insane. Although they can incorporate it pretty quickly. And then we got the Bear. And the Bear's dead last if you're not rushing for Algalon because they just don't like the bonuses at all. So again, I'm not going to talk about the individual items of tier as much in 10-man because it's really all about the bonuses. That's where we're going to leave it when it comes to tier. With that, we're going to move on to Flame Leviathan. So I'm going to talk about, like I mentioned, trinkets and then hard mode items. I'll mention real quick Energy Siphon. This item is not super good. It's not really on many BIS lists. Not many guides talk about it. It's not very good, but if you've got a healer that is still sitting on a bad trinket, feel free for them to snag it up. But this is really going to be more of a healer item, and it is not very contested, not very good. Then we've got Pyrite Infuser. Now, Pyrite Infuser is not on any BIS list either. It's not a BIS item. Now, It is actually pretty decent for an enhancement shaman. So if you have no one who wants it, it can be a decent placeholder for enhance. But besides that, it's really just going to go to whoever could use it as a temporary hit upgrade. This is not really a long-term BIS item typically. With that, let's head to the hard mode for Flame Leviathan. We've got the Handguards of Potent Cures. These are going to be better for a Boomy than a Resto Shaman because they like crit, but they're not BIS. So Boomy before Resto Druid. Boomy before Resto Druid, being that it's Spirit and Leather. Mantle of Fiery Vengeance. This is best in slot for Hunter. A little better for Survival than Marksman because Marksman can use Tier a little better. So you could say Survival before Marksman, but again, doesn't really matter. Give it to Hunter before another spec. BIS for Hunter. These are Plate Tank Legs. Now, these are not BIS, so it doesn't really matter which tank you give them to. Really just any, Blood Decay, Prot Warrior, Prot Pally, whoever. They're not bad. Also, as I'm going through here, just this Atlas loot is not up to date. So if you see the eye levels, just keep in mind that you typically have to add about 13 eye level, 12 to 13 eye level to each item I look at from the hard modes, and you need to add about 6 to the normal mode. So these trinkets should be 225, and these items are going to be 239. And if you see a weapon, it's going to be 245. So just a heads up, all the stuff I'm hovering over, these are the pre-buff stats. So you're going to see they're going to get even better than what we're looking at here. All right, on to Shimmering Seal. Now this is a decent ring. It's actually pretty close to best in slot for any caster that needs hit and can use the Spirit. It is only 22 Spirit though. But yeah, that's who would benefit most from it. It is on the BIS list for one healer, and that is a support demonology spec because it helps them fix their hit issues and has really high spell power. So this is going to be a BIS ring for a supportive demonology spec, which I'm going to be talking about throughout the video. We're going to be, kind of expecting the demonology to play a support spec to buff the raid with spell power. So demonology would be a great caster to give this to first, then kind of just give it to anyone who's not an elemental shaman. The reason I say that is because elemental shaman cannot use this Spirit effectively, which makes it a little bit worse, not too much worse, but a little bit worse, and potentially worth giving to someone else. Next, we have the Twirling Blades, last item here. This item is best in slot for Combat Rogue and for DPS Warriors. I would recommend giving it to DPS Warriors first, then Combat Rogue, then Assassination. It's not actually BIS for Assassination, so Warrior then Combat for sure on this one. It is still good for Assassination though. Next, we've got Ignis. Nothing really too much to mention about Ignis. There's this dodge armor tank trinket. I mean, could try and give it to a tank that has no good trinket. It's not the best though. Onto Razor Scale. Not too much to talk about here, except for Eye of the Broodmother. This is actually quite a good trinket. Can be used by a lot of people. Not considered BIS for any spec, but it has uses for a lot of classes. So Fire Mage and Boomies gain a decent bit from it. And then also some classes that like illustration that maybe didn't get it. So potentially a Disc Priest, potentially a Resto Shaman. These are classes that could use it as well. But I would typically say Boomkin and Fire would be the best candidates for this trinket. And then after that, potentially a caster or a healer that doesn't have a good trinket. But I would really only lean probably in the healer front to one of the healers that can stack up, that stacks up a little well. Maybe a Resto Shaman or your Disc Priest or your Holy Priest or something. I would not give this to a Holy Paladin, and I would not give this to a Resto Druid. The Resto Druid doesn't want the crit. So yeah, not those healers. And then besides that, probably Boomy and Fire would be the best bets there. They can actually get pretty close to, it's not close to BIS, but if they sit on Eye of the Broodmother, they can actually hold on to it for a while because there's a lot of trinket competition. Next, we have the Fluxing Energy Coils. Now, these are best in slot for quite a few classes. It is BIS for the Combat Rogue. It is BIS for the Survival Hunter and the Feral Cat. Assassination actually uses a different wrist, and so does Marksman. But really, in Marksman only uses that at Biskier, so I still think this is a great item to give to a Hunter. But yeah, Fluxing Energy Coils, I would give to Hunter first, then Combat and Feral. Combat and Feral can both use an Expertise wrist that's 252, that's quite good. It just sometimes doesn't work with their sets. That's why this one's considered BIS. But I would definitely give this one to Hunter first because they can't use the Expertise wrist very well. And then Combat and Feral. And then the rest of the classes. I mean, Armor Pen can still be used by a lot of classes like Warrior and stuff, even though they have other options. Next, we have Breastplate of the Stone Shaper. This one is going to want to go to your Resto Shaman first because it's actually BIS for them. After that, it can be used as a temporary upgrade for an Ellie or a Holy Paladin. Next, we have Seal of Ulduar. Now, this is a nice tank ring for any tank, but it's only actually on the BIS list for a Blood DK. So give this to your Blood DK first. Check that off their BIS list, and then give it to your other tanks. Next, we have Acer's Edge. Now, this has Armor Pen on it, and it's a nice early two-hander. If we're looking at who benefits most from this, it's definitely Fury Warrior, because ideally, an Arms Warrior would love to have a spear or an axe for poleaxe specialization instead of playing sword spec. And also, a Ret Paladin doesn't benefit from the Armor Pen quite as much. So for Acer's Edge, I would definitely say Fury first, but after that, you could give one to Ret or Arms. Another big reason to give this to Fury first is they actually need two trinkets, two weapons. And if they don't get, you're probably not going to see them with two 252 weapons right away from the hard mode 25 mans. So this is going to be a great main hand that moves to their offhand eventually when they get another weapon. So this is a great item for a Fury Warrior. Next, we have this Magnetized Projectile Emitter. Definitely give this to a Hunter first as an early big eye level boost. But after that, it can definitely be used well by a Rogue. So Hunter, then Rogue, then potentially something like a Warrior. And you could prioritize it to Assassination before you do your Combat if you want, because your Combat's going to be higher prio on the Armor Pen thrown weapon. Next, we have Iron Council hard mode. We have Belt of the Crystal Tree. Now, this is not a best in slot item. Belt of the Crystal Tree is reasonable for both Resto Druid and Boomy, but I would say the crafted belt, that there's multiple crafted belts, but you can get a better crafted belt for a Boomy. So I would definitely say Resto Druid first, but this is not a BIS item for either. Then we have the Watchful Eye of Fate. Now, this item is actually quite good for a lot of classes. It's typically around third BIS for any caster that uses it well. So it is going to be quite good for any healer or caster, except I wouldn't recommend giving it to a Holy Paladin or a Resto Shaman because they waste the spirit. I wouldn't give it to an Ellie because they have another hard mode 10-man neck they can get instead. They also don't use the spirit. And also Boomy. I wouldn't give it to a Boomy before any of the other casters because they don't use spirit quite as well as the other casters, and they also have a nice crit alternative they can use. So basically, every healer and caster can go for this one that uses spirit well, which leaves Boomy, Ellie, and Resto Shaman, Holy Paladin to wait in line. Next, we have Loop of the Agile. Now, this is best in slot for only enhancement, but it is very close to best in slot for assassination. So I would give this to enhancement definitely first, then assassination. Combat can also use this for the whole phase as a very near BIS item. And then I would look to potentially give this to someone like a Feral or a Hunter after that. But yeah, definitely enhance first and then typically Rogue after that. But best in slot for enhancement. Next, we have the Masticator. This is an enhance or a combat weapon. Really fine for either. It kind of depends what the current weapons are for the enhance and the rogue. But if you've got a combat rogue, this would be great. If you've got a enhance, it would be great. So just kind of base it off what the current weapons are and give it to one of them. Perilous Bite. This can only be used by assassination, so no real discussion to be had there. Then we have this Archivum data disk. Just give this to someone in your guild that is going to have very good attendance, someone that you can trust, maybe an officer, maybe the GM. This just helps you start the quest for Algalon. And you just want to get it on that person so that they can, start the Algalon fight and, get that as soon as possible. Okay, so we've gone through quite a few of these bosses here. We're on to, just making sure I didn't miss any normal mode loot. I don't think I did. On to Kolagharn, and there's one thing that I want to talk about, and that's the Spark of Hope. 100 spirit, and it reduces the base cost of your spells by 42. The Spark of Hope is actually on the BIS list for the Resto Druid, and it's also something that could be potentially used by a disc, but I would definitely go Resto Druid first, then disc. But yeah, a BIS item for Resto Druid. Next, we have Algalon. I'm actually going to talk about every item from Algalon because all of them actually have the hard mode eye level. So first, we'll start with Drape of the Messenger. This is a nice hit cloak. It is actually pretty close to BIS for several classes. I would recommend giving this to Boomies and Ellies first because there's no spirit on it. And there are a couple alternatives that have spirit on them. And the Boomies and Ellies can't use those. But you really could give this to any caster DPS that could make use of it. But yeah, Boomy and Ellie would be my recommendation just because Ellie doesn't use spirit at all, and Boomy gains the least amount of spirit amongst caster DPS. Next, we have Pulsar Gloves. These are not best in slot for anyone. Honestly, just give it to any caster DPS that is not a Boomy or Ellie. So last time we said prefer the Boomy or Ellie. Don't give this to a Boomy or Ellie because they have leather and mail gloves they can use. But yeah, give it to a Clothy at first that can just benefit from it. And that's pretty much it. Then we have the Starlight Treads. Now these are quite good for a Shadow Priest and quite good for a Boomy. I think a Shadow Priest and a Boomy that gets this item should be content with it for pretty much the whole phase. It's not best in slot, but it's going to be pretty close for them. So I would recommend maybe a slight prio to Shadow Priest because of the cloth. And there's, a little more options that a Boomy could get. But yeah, Shadow Priest and Boomy, I think should definitely go for this item. And I think they should sit on it the whole phase in most cases. Some of the contested boots are quite good, but they really like crit, and these work really well for them. But that is my recommendation there. Gloves of Endless Dark. Now these are best in slot for Combat Rogue. They're actually really good for a lot of classes, but yeah, best in slot for Combat Rogue. So make sure you give them to Combat Rogue first. And then there's a whole slew of classes that can use them. It's really just going to go to biggest upgrade after that, or whoever can make use of the slot and isn't running tier on their glove. You could say something like Hunter would be good after, but they're going to be the ones first in line to get the 252 gloves that they want. So I'll definitely just kind of go biggest upgrade after Combat Rogue. Keep in mind that an Assassination Rogue uses tier glove in their BIS setup. All right, next we have Zodiac Leggings. Not much to say here. Give it to a Boomy, give it to a Resto Druid. It doesn't really matter. It is a temporary item that is not going to last long. So just give it to whoever. Temp upgrade, not a big deal. Next, we have Observer's Mantle. This is not best in slot, but it can be used in some setups as an Ellie. It is, I guess for the same reasoning, it could be used in some setups for a Resto Shaman as well. Just give it to one of them. It is actually going to be pretty big immediate upgrade for them, but both of them really want their 4 sets. So maybe see which one is closer to 4 set, which one's getting 4 set faster. Both have very strong 4 sets though. So if you're going for an early Ellie 4 set, maybe give this to your Resto Shaman while they are waiting to get theirs going. But both are not going to want to break their 4 set. All right, we have shoulder plates of the Celestial Watch. These are BIS for arms. After that, you can kind of give it to any plate DPS. All of them, or a lot of them use tier, and this is not BIS for anyone else. Obviously, Armor Pen is typically going to be better for, your warriors, your Frosty Ks before something like Unholy or Ret. But yeah, definitely a fine piece. Just give biggest upgrade after arms. If you do have an arms warrior though, give it to them. It is their BIS. Next, we have Breastplate of the Timeless. This is on the BIS list for only one tank, and that is going to be the prop pally. Give it to the prop pally before the other tanks because they use it in their bis. But again, it would be fine on any plate tank. Next, we have the Starfall Girdle. Now, the Starfall Girdle is just going to be something that I think should just go out the biggest upgrade. It's quite far away from a belt we're going to talk about later. This item, despite its eye level, is actually statted really, really poorly. So it's not even really that good. I just mentioned it because it's in the hard mode loot. Just give it the biggest upgrade. Keep in mind that arms warriors don't really like expertise that much because even if the stuff does get dodged, they can overpower. So maybe not the best for them. And then you got to watch and make sure you don't waste the expertise on whoever gets it. Next, we have Pendant of the Somber Witness. This is an amazing neck for a healer. I wouldn't really have any specification of which one. Any healer can roll for this one. So yeah, equal prio to healers. And this is a great neck that the healers can sit on for a while until they get their 252 hard mode neck that also has MP5. All right, Strength of the Heavens. This is actually best in slot for Unholy Death Knight. So Strength of the Heavens should definitely go to your Unholy first. It's also quite good for Ret, so it should go to Ret after. And then probably something like a Frosty K. It's not quite as good for DPS Warrior, so I wouldn't give it to them until last. Then we have Band of Lights. This thing is quite good. It is best in slot for both Rogue specs and Feral. However, really, a lot of classes can use it if they end up needing hit, depending on their setup. Even something like a Warrior or not really Frosty K as much. It could be used by them, but they've got really the strength classes have another hit ring they should use instead. So I would really stick with the non-strength classes here. So Rogue and Feral should definitely be the first up to get this, followed by Hunter and Enhance, and then the rest of the classes are kind of going to be further behind. Keep in mind this would be a little bit worse for an enhancement that goes for a spell power main hand. As their build in this phase, a shaman could go for a spell power main hand or a physical main hand. The spell power main hand does more AoE damage. The physical main hand does more single target. All right, on to Nebula Band. This is BIS for a ton of classes. It is BIS for Affliction, Elemental, Boomy, Shadow Priest, Resto Shaman, and Mage. Basically, I would recommend giving Nebula Ring to Boomies and Ellies first, and then the rest. I would, even though it's on the BIS list for Resto Shaman, I wouldn't give it to Resto Shaman until all of the casters have it, because there's some MP5 rings that the healers can go for. But yeah, I would say Ellie and Boomy before the rest. And the reason I say that is because the ring that is best in slot for all casters has Spirit on it. And so your Boomy and your Ellie is not going to get that first. And that would make a good argument for them to get this one first, because they're going to be pretty much bottom of the barrel on the best in slot Spirit hard mode ring that is 252 that everyone's going to want. Next, we have the Dark Matter trinket. Dark Matter is BIS for Assassination and Hunter. I do think Assassination does much better with it right out the gate based on Sims. They gain more. So I would recommend giving it to, it's also BIS for Enhancement as well. But it's BIS for Assassination, Hunter, Enhance, and I would recommend giving it to Assassination first, and then Enhancement and Hunter. Doesn't really matter between Enhancement and Hunter. They both gain about the same, but Rogue does gain, specifically Assassination, not Combat. Assassination gains about twice the benefit that the other do, typically. So, on to Meteorite Crystal. This is an intellect trinket that is going to give you mana back. Kind of sounds like a paladin trinket, and that is exactly what it is. Holy Paladin really like this. Can also be given to a Holy Priest. Holy Priests also really like intellect. They also gem intellect in most setups, or a lot of setups at least. So Holy Priest or Holy Paladin, give it to one of them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Typically, you're probably going to see this going to Holy Paladins. Next, we have Reply Code Alpha. So this is an item that starts at Quest, and you can pick one of 4 rewards. An MP5 ring, an Agility Armor Pen ring, a Haste Cloak, and a Strength Cloak. So right out the gate, I want to stress, Drape of the Sky Herald, do not get confused. there is 2 versions of this. If we go to 25 man, there's another reply code alpha. So do not get confused. All the items look the same, different items. You can equip 2 of those rings. So one of this ring, the 239 brand sealing ring, and you can also equip the 252 from 25 man brand's signet ring. So keep that in mind. So what that essentially means is you only want to make rings, because this cloak is not bis, this cloak is not bis, this ring is bis for quite a few classes, and this ring is also bis sometimes. So basically you never want to make the cloak. It's a big mistake to make it, because you can just replace it with the 25 man version, and or just other items that you see. So never pick cloak with the 10 man version ever, and you want to prioritize it to anyone who's making the agility ring. The agility ring on 10 man, again, specifically the 10 man agility ring, is bis for several classes that run 2 of them. They run brand sealing and then the 25 one, the signet. They run them side by side. And the classes that do that are going to be Hunter and as well as Fury Warrior. So Hunters, I think, should be getting this. They never really have hit issues, so they don't typically want some of the other rings like a Band of Lights, because they just really always have so much hit. So I think Hunter should get brand sealing ring first, but Fury Warrior is a great candidate as well. So I would say Hunter, then Fury, then Feral. The reason I put Feral third is because a lot of Feral lists do not use this exact ring. They use Band of Light instead. However, you could run 2, both this in the upgraded version, on a Feral, or if you don't end up getting the upgraded one, this would be great for a while. So I would definitely say, you're going to want Hunter, then Fury, then Feral, Arms, and Rogue. Feral, Arms, and Rogue all can use this as a temp upgrade. And then after that, you can start making some Starshine signets. You can definitely make some Starshine signets as well for healers instead of giving them to Ferals, Arms, and Rogues, if that individual has already gotten a decent trinket or a decent ring from other sources. Okay, so just in summary though, brand sealing ring is bis. This exact ring on 10 man is bis for Hunter and Fury Warrior. Okay, on to the next boss, Auriaya. This thing is Elemental Focus Stone. This item is not tremendous. It's not very good. I haven't really seen too much about it, except that it's not good. That no lists really run it. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. Just whoever thinks they can use all that hit as a caster, it's a lot of hit. On to Hodir. Not too much to talk about from the normal stuff. On to the hard mode items. So Bitter Cold Arm Guards. These are not best in slot. There's a 252 plate wrist. Really just give this to any plate DPS. Doesn't really matter. So just whoever. On to Shiver. Shiver is a tank item, typically. So it'd be really good for a Prot Warrior. Very close to bis for them. So Prot Warrior should get it first. Followed by Prot Paladin. Now Prot Paladins can use slower weapons, and that's why I say put them behind Warrior, because they might want a slower weapon eventually, whereas a Warrior is more likely to use longer. Blood DK would also be a good candidate for Shiver. Now, Unholy I have lower than Blood DK, just because I think gearing up tanks is really important in this expansion, and Blood DKs can dual wield on any fight that isn't Thorim or Auriaya. Well, this fight here, Auriaya, whatever its name is. The reason I put Unholy pretty low is this is like a fourth, like 5th bis type item. They can use multiple swords and weapons before this. And in fact, they could even get, if you get an early Shiver for a tank, you could potentially give the better tank weapon that eventually drops to an Unholy once you've got everything on farm and your tanks don't need more survivability. So I would just say there's so many options an Unholy could get. I would still even give this to a Blood DK over an Unholy. But it does kind of depend on if you have weapons ready as a Blood DK. You do want to keep in mind that you don't want to dual wield on Thorim in Auriaya as a blood decay because of parry haste. All right, on to Ice Core Staff. Now, this staff is actually exceptional. This staff is best in slot for, well, I don't want to say best in slot, is very close to best in slot for Arcane and Resto Druid. It is very close to Bis for Arcane. So I would heavily recommend giving this to Arcane and Resto Druids, if the Resto Druid is not going to get Valinir, of course. Not to say that they shouldn't. I'll talk about Valinir in the 25-man version of this video. But the Ice Core Staff is actually incredibly powerful for the Arcane Mage and the Resto Druid, so they should definitely be excited to get this. This is actually really good and quite, basically, I mean, very close to Bis. Next, we have the Ice Layered Barrier. This is an MP5 shield, so Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin. This is, not the best shield. There's a 252 version, but definitely a nice item for them. Next, we have the Burial Guard. This thing is actually very good, very close to Bis for the tanks. There is a 252 shield, but yeah, very good. No real reason to split it between Prot Warrior or Pally, just whoever you want amongst those two. All right, on to Thorim. Thorim has Mjolnir Runestone from its hard mode. We'll start there. We've got other items, but we'll start that. That's an exciting one. So the Mjolnir Runestone is Bis for quite a few classes. It's Bis for DPS warriors, combat rogues, marksman hunters, frost death knights, and feral cats. The classes that benefit the most are in the following order. Fury benefits the most, followed closely behind by Feral. Feral gains a lot, so both Fury and Feral are good options, but Fury gains a little more DPS. Most of these classes are replacing Grim Toll, by the way, but not all. Your Arms Warrior is going to gain a decent amount, but not as much as Fury or Frost. Your Combat Rogue is going to gain a lot as well, followed by Marksman Hunter. So in that order, once again, Fury gains the most, followed by Feral, Frost Decay, Arms, Combat, Marksman Hunter, and it goes in that order. That's how I would recommend doing it. Keep in mind that this is Bis for all of them and a really nice trinket. So crazy that so many people want that 10-man trinket. Going back a second, Gauntlets of the Thunder God, Holy Paladin, not much to say here. It's a Holy Paladin healing item, just give it to them. It's not Bis. They use Tear Gloves, but it is what it is. On to the Pendant of the Shallow Grave. Now, this is the crit neck I talked about before. This is best in slot for Elemental Shaman. So it's actually, definitely should go to them first because it is their best in slot. After that, the crit is actually making this item quite good for Boomy, Fire Mage, and Shadow Priest. They each really like crit more than the rest of the classes. So this makes this neck actually very close to Bis. So I would recommend giving this to Boomy, Fire, and Shadow Priest and having them sit on it for pretty much the whole phase because it is very close to Bis and quite good. So there's that. I would not typically look to give this to healers right away just because there's some other MP5 items they could get. On to Sif's Remembrance. Now, this is not listed as Bis for any healer, but it's a great option for pretty much any healer. I would give this to any healer that's not a Holy Paladin. Holy Paladins still have Dark Moon card, and they also have, in addition to that, they want that new trinket that has spell power on it, and they can still use Soul Preserver. So basically, don't give this to a Holy Paladin because they can use Soul Preserver, Dark Moon card, and the new trinket that are all better than this. All right, then we got the Boot Blade. The Boot Blade is very good. It's basically the exact same thing as the 252 dagger, just slightly scaled down stats. This is an amazing item. It is best in slot. Well, the other dagger that is very close to it is best in slot for both combat in the offhand and assassination in both hands. So as an assassination rogue, you would want 2 Boot Blades or, and I forget the name, but I can grab it real quick. The Freya hard mode dagger is called Blade Twister. So as an assassination rogue, you would want either Blade Twister or Boot Blade in each hand, one of each or 2 of the same one, doesn't matter. Blade Twister is better, but you're not going to get it right away. And so back over to our hard mode here. Your assassination rogue should get the first one of those 2 daggers. And then your combat rogue should get the second one of either of those 2 daggers before your assassination rogue gets both. And the reason for that is because there is a Algalon dagger called the Fang of Oblivion that your assassination rogue can use in their offhand. And if you give 2 daggers straight to the assassination right away, then you might have to disenchant this if you run out of assassinations to give it to. It's a similar increase in the offhand for combat and assassination to put one of those faster daggers. So anyway, long story short, give your assassination, if your assassination hasn't gotten one of the good daggers, give them that first, then one to combat, then the second one back to assassination. Okay, cool. On to Freya. Freya has these gloves, these mail gloves. These are actually pretty close to tier for Ellie, despite that being the slot that they in their BIS want to have as their offset. So honestly, it really doesn't matter who gets this. Biggest upgrade. It might be easiest to give this to an Ellie until they eventually get gloves, but the gloves they want are incredibly contested, so that can be hard as well. So basically, these gloves are just whoever can use them between your Ellie and your Resto. But both have reasons why it might be, not ideal to use it. Next, we have the Seeds of Bunning Carnage. So this is actually quite good. It is not BIS for anyone, but it is close to BIS for quite a few classes. I would recommend giving this to a feral cat and having them sit on it for like the whole phase. There's a better 252 agility neck from 25 man, but there's too many people that need it for it to go around. So I would recommend giving this to a feral first, then potentially a combat rogue or a hunter or a warrior, and then ret, assassination, death knight, they're further down the list. So feral, then combat, hunter, or warrior. So one of those 3 would come after feral. All right, Fire Orchid Signet. Now this is a healer ring, and it's BIS for every single healer. The only healer it is something that, there's really no healer you wouldn't give it to. It's a BIS for every healer. There's no real specificity that I need to add. Just, give it to any healer that maybe needs a ring the most. So all healers can use it. Next, we have Saralas. Now, this is technically not on any BIS list, but it is very close to BIS for Frost Death Knight. It is also very close to BIS for Unholy Death Knight. It is 3rd BIS for Combat Rogue, and it is 2nd BIS for Prop Paladin in a threat set. Prop Paladins in a threat set want a slower weapon to do more threat on AoE especially. But even just a faster weapon, or even in single target, a slower weapon can be good for them. So basically, this should go to Frost DKs first. It's very close to their BIS, and they need slow weapons. Followed by Unholy. Again, Unholy doesn't rely... Unholy has more options and can use faster weapons. So that's why Frost should get it first. Then Combat Rogue. Combat Rogue has a couple combinations of weapons that are better than using swords, and it can be a little hard to make this work for a Combat Rogue. And yeah, Prop Paladin is last. The reason I have Prop Paladin last is this is not really a big survivability item. This is a threat item, and that's not something you should be looking to give to your Prop Paladin until well on farm, and so it's not a big priority. You really want to focus on their survivability first, and a threat item like this is something that comes later down the road. All right, on to the Petrifying Ivy Sprig. Now, this is very good for every caster. It is BIS for every single caster. There are some setups that don't use it for mage, but it's basically just BIS for every caster. I would say it's definitely best for demonology because of the high spell power with the socket, with the spirit. It's going to give your raid more spell power than any other wand can get. The biggest thing about this wand is its high spell power. So that's great on your demo. So I would recommend giving it to a demo for your demo stack. After that, you've got Fire Mage. Fire Mage potentially needs the hit more than some of the other classes. Warlock and Shadow Priest are also good candidates for it, but might not need the hit quite as much as Fire. And there's other wands they can use if they don't need the hit. And then Arcane Mage is going to be the one that needs this the least. They have similar alternatives they can use, and they also don't need to hit as much as the other. So I would say Arcane last on this one. Next, we have got Mimiron hard mode. For Firefighter is the achievement. Mimiron Flight Goggles. So these are best in slot for Combat Rogue. And yeah, should go to Combat Rogue first. Because you can get Tier Helm from Conquest, it doesn't really matter who gets this next. A lot of classes use their Tier Helm. So, or could use some tier setup that would be better than this. So basically give this to a Rogue and then whoever after that. But definitely Combat Rogue first. Then for the Tempered Mercury Greaves, these are best in slot for enhancement. Can give them to a Hunter after, but Hunters usually use two different boots, either the crafted boots or a pair of 252 boots. But yeah, these are enhancement bists, so give them to enhancement first. Next, we have the Fused Alloy Leg Plates. And this is kind of a weird item. It's not best in slot, and there are some Conquest legs that people can get. So some classes don't really want these very much. They're actually pretty good for Ret and pretty good for Frost. You give them to a Frost Death Knight, they don't really worry about having too much hit as much because they dual wield. And they use a lot of spells, so getting closer to spell hit cap doesn't hurt. So this could be efficiently used by a Frost DK, but also would be good for a Ret if they can use the hit. I would recommend giving it to either a Ret or a Frost DK. It's not really as good for Warrior and Unholy compared to badge items or Conquest items. Next, Greaves of the Iron Army. These are bis for every tank. Doesn't really matter which tank gets them. If you really wanted, you could give it to a Blood DK first, because there is a 25-man trash drop pair of boots that you could give to one of the shield tanks if you're really trying to play it safe in case those drop. But those aren't better than these anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, and I would just give these to either slight Prio to the Blood or just anyone. Next, we got Fusion Blade, and this is where kind of the puzzle piece of the caster weapons is kind of coming together. So this is a sword, so it can only be used by a Warlock or a Mage. And we already mentioned that Arcane Mage should use that staff we talked about earlier. So we don't want to necessarily give this to an Arcane Mage because they want the other staff. Demonology Warlocks also are looking for a higher spell power weapon, and are a little bit less interested in just like kind of the crit. Really, they're just great candidates. Warlocks in general are great candidates for the best spell power weapon in the game that have Spirit on it. So they're going to be lower on this one. What this is good for is a Fire or an Affliction. And the Demonology Warlock is potentially going to be a better candidate for the weapon we'll talk about in the 25-man video. But yeah, Fire and Affliction work really well with this. And yeah, if you're playing Frost Firebolt Mage, you should itemize more like the Arcane Mage and go for that staff though. So Fire and Affliction before Demo, before Arcane. And because it is hit, we don't give this to a healer. Well, aka Holy Paladin. All right, on to General Vezax. This cloak is quite good. The cloak is best in slot for Hunter, Warrior, Frost DK, and Feral. In terms of what classes gain the most from it, really Feral, Hunter, Frost DK, Warrior, it's best for all of them. They all gain pretty much the same. They're realistically not going to get another cloak that would ever replace this. So yeah, definitely give it to either a Feral, a Hunter, a Frost DK, or a Warrior. They all gain a lot. No specific prio between them. Rogue or Ret should come after that. Ret has other options they can use and technically can use a hit cloak. Rogue also would prefer the hit cloak as well as Enhance. So Enhance and Rogue are definitely at the bottom of this one because they would rather have the hit cloak from 25-man. All right, next we have Leggings of Profound Darkness. Now these legs are not really particularly good at anything, really. They're just kind of there. Give them to the biggest upgrade. A lot of casters are going to use tier legs. If they use it as an off piece, there's other off pieces. Oh, there's my alert. There's other 25-man items that you can go with. Next, we have Void Saber. Now, Void Saber is actually really good for an Unholy DK. It's actually best in slot in the offhand. The reason why, you could give it to a combat rogue as part of their third BIS setup, but it's really going to be BIS for your Unholy DK. Should definitely go to them first. They use it in their offhand, but could be something they could use in the main hand temporarily as well. But yeah, definitely Unholy first, then Combat Rogue. In Combat Rogue, potentially might never be interested in this if they already have a good fist weapon, because then they wouldn't be playing swords. So if the Combat Rogue's never going to go to swords, you could off-spec this after that as well. Next, we have Asuga. Now, this item is just a caster mace. I would recommend giving this to elemental shamans, because this is like the best item that just works out for them. If you don't give this to elemental shaman, there's really nothing else to give them, because the staffs have spirit on them, and the BIS caster dagger has spirit on it, and the best mace from 25 man has MP5 on it, which is more of a healer item. So basically, you really ought to give this to an Ellie Shaman, or they don't really have anything left. Now, if you don't have an Ellie Shaman, you can definitely give this to any caster that can use it. It's good for all the rest of the casters. They all have other items they might like a little more, but this is a very good spell power weapon for anyone who can use it besides Ellie. I just would definitely prio them first if you have an Ellie in the 10-man, because again, it's all 10-man here. On to Tortured Earth. Now, this item is going to be a hunter or a feral item. It is not best in slot. Just give it to the feral first, because the big boost in eye level and weapon damage does make them do more damage in cat. They scale based on how much damage the weapon does. So that's why it's better for them than a hunter. It is not just a stat stick for the feral cat. All right, cool. We're on to Yogg, the last set of loot. And we have just a few items here. I'll start with the Vanquish Tentacle. This is kind of just a meme item. I've seen like one BIS list mention it. I don't even know if it's simming accurately currently. I would say this is pretty much just a meme item. It could potentially be a damage increase for someone with a horrible trinket though, especially if their class likes crit. But yeah, kind of a goofy item. Next, we have the Amice of Inconceivable Horror. This is a very good shoulder for any caster, but specifically BIS for Warlock. A lot of the other casters use tier shoulders. So yeah, give it to a Warlock first. Would be better on a demo before Affliction, but both can use tier sets. Both their 2 and 4 set temporarily. So yeah, I would say demo before Affliction. Next, we have a crazy item. This is the Soul Devouring Cinch. This item is actually best in slot for Hunter, Ret, Warrior, Rogue, and Feral. One thing to start with right away, it has expertise on it, and that is not a stat that's efficiently going to be used by a hunter. So we're not going to be giving it to a hunter anytime soon. It is best in slot for Rogue and Feral and is really good for them. I would definitely give it to Rogue and Feral first. The reason to give it to them before Warrior and Ret, both of them have a plate belt they could get from 25 man, even if they're not prioed on it before Death Knight. It at least gives them more options. The Rogue and Feral have less options. So Rogue and Feral first, followed by Warrior. After that, it can go to a Ret, and only after Ret would I give it to a Hunter. The reason I wouldn't give it to an Enhancement Shaman is because there's a crafted belt that is better, or at least there's a crafting belt on their BIS. To be completely honest with you, if you did have an enhancement particularly interested in this, that for whatever reason thought it was better than the crafted belt, I would probably potentially give it to them before a Hunter too, because of the expertise being wasted on the Hunter. But yeah, typically your enhance should be okay with the crafted belt, but it depends on the particular list they're building towards. Anywho, on to the Signet of Soft Lament. This is not BIS for anyone, but because it has a lot of crit and spirit, it's actually quite good for your fire mage who really likes crit, and it's also decent for priests, healing priests, because a lot of the healing priests are not going to be prioritized very quickly on their actual BIS rings. And so it's kind of best to give them something like this that is pretty good because typically the healers, when we get to the better rings, they're not going to be prioed on a lot of the 25-man options. So I would recommend a healer being able to pick up this item, either not a resto druid because they don't want the crit, but I would recommend this going to potentially a holy priest or a disc or a fire mage, one of those three. Of course, it can go to any caster, but it would benefit them the most versus the other ones. Cool. On to Caress of Insanity. This is best in slot for Frost DK as their weapon. It's similar to the sword we talked about from Nope, not Vezax. Who drops that big sword? We already talked about it. Yep. Nope, not that one either. I must have skipped past it. Saralas. There we go. Sorry about that. It is very similar to Saralas. It is a little bit slower. Because it is a mace, it is usable by an enhancement shaman. So it is best in slot for enhancement shaman in their offhand, and it's best in slot for Frost DK. Those are definitely the two classes that should get it first, because Frost DK can use it in as a big main hand increase. They also need 2 slow weapons, so they can use it in main hand or offhand, meaning they can get 2. And Unholy also likes this, but should be lower than Frost DK because, again, they can use some of the faster weapons and they can pick up extra tank weapons that no one needs. So they're typically going to pick up kind of, not the scraps, but just whatever isn't needed by the others. And they're actually very good. It's just they have so much flexibility. So yeah, Frost DK followed by Enhance, Frost DK and Enhance equal Prio. The reason for that is because the Enhancement Shaman really relies on this to be their 2.7 speed weapon in BIS, but that sometimes means when they first see it drop, it might not even be as good for them because it messes up their weapon speed sinks. They want 2 matching weapon speeds. So there's some weird stuff with Enhancement Shaman weapons. It's just always good for Frost. So I would say Frost and Enhance equal Prio. You could decide based on the current weapon situation who you think should get it. But yeah, Frost Enhance equal Prio, followed by Unholy. Now, technically, a prop paladin could use this as their BIS threat weapon. But again, like I said before, they should be back of the line because it's more important that the raid gets, that the tank gets tankier rather than threat right away. All right, that is pretty much it. We have covered all of the items in 10-man. As a time of, if you're seeing this right away, I will be releasing the 25-man video tomorrow. As you're watching this, most likely it's already out. So check that out. It'll be linked in the description. The 25-man version of all the Ulduar loot. Again, thanks all for watching. Make sure to subscribe and follow my Twitch in the description below. And I'll see you guys next time.